Imagine standing in the heart of Ottawa, Canada's capital, in the early days of May. The atmosphere is filled with the fragrance of spring. And right before your eyes, stretching along the winding banks of Dow's Lake at Commissioners Park is a spectacle that would make anyone hold their breath. A vibrant sea of hues. More than 1 million tulips blossoming in unison. Ribbons of crimson, bright yellow, deep violet, and soft pink extend to the horizon, swaying gently in the breeze like the soft waves of a floral ocean. Thousands of visitors from all corners of the world converge here. They crowd the pathways, cameras in hand, attempting to capture the perfect shot. Children run and play among the flower beds, their laughter blending with the morning sunlight. Couples hold hands, and occasionally you will glimpse elderly veterans, chests heavy with medals, standing silently, their gaze fixed on those delicate petals. To most observers, this is the Canadian Tulip Festival. The largest tulip festival in the world, a symbol of spring, a tourist attraction, and a perfect backdrop for Instagram photos. But there is an intriguing detail here that few pause to question. Why tulips? Why is Canada's national emblem the maple leaf, yet its capital is globally celebrated for the flower associated with the Netherlands? And most importantly, why amidst this vast forest of blossoms, are there always special beds sent directly from across the Atlantic, crossing thousands of miles of ocean to arrive here, consistently and punctually like clockwork? The truth is, this isn't part of the Ottawa city horticulture budget. Every single year, the Dutch royal family and the citizens of the Netherlands still send tens of thousands of tulip bulbs to Canada. They pack them with care, ship them across the ocean, and place them into Canadian hands. They did this last year, they are doing it this year, and they will continue to do it next year. This is a peculiar gesture if you truly reflect on it. In the realm of modern diplomacy, where relationships are often gauged by trade agreements, arms deals, or geopolitical calculations, for a European nation to persistently gift flowers to a North American nation for nearly 80 years is unprecedented. It does not follow the rules of economic self-interest. It follows the rules of the heart, because these flowers are not just plants. They are living witnesses. Every bulb planted in Ottawa soil is a thank you that has never ceased. A gratitude rooted in the darkest years of human history, when the light of liberty seemed almost extinguished in Europe. But this story contains a painful paradox. A paradox we must unravel to truly grasp the weight of these petals. We know the Dutch cherish tulips, but history also records that at the absolute nadir of the war, this elegant flower became the only thing preventing the Dutch people from starving. They had to crush those precious bulbs, boiling them into a bitter soup just to survive the harsh winter. So why would a people who once had to consume tulips in utter despair choose that very flower to gift to their saviors? Why didn't they select a gift less reminiscent of suffering? And why, after nearly a century, when the soldiers of yesteryear have aged and passed on, when the children born in war have become grandparents, has the shipment of flowers from the Netherlands never ceased? To answer that question, we cannot stand in the Ottawa of the present with its warm sun and peace. We must journey back in time. We must leave this brilliant sea of flowers to return to black and white footage, to a Europe in flames and a Netherlands buckling under the boot of invasion. Before the darkness fell, the Netherlands was a picture of serenity. It was a nation that prided itself on neutrality, a small but affluent country of merchants, artists, and farmers. It was a land of windmills turning lazily in the breeze, of canals reflecting the tranquil sky, and, of course, of tulips. For centuries, the Dutch had cultivated this flower, transforming it into a global emblem of beauty and prosperity. They believed that if they minded their own business, the storm gathering over Europe would pass them by. They were mistaken. The illusion shattered in May 1940. It didn't take months. It took only 5 days. The German war machine, the Blitzkrieg, swept across the Dutch border with terrifying speed. The sky turned black with paratroopers, and the city of Rotterdam was flattened by bombers. Overwhelmed and outgunned, the Netherlands was forced to surrender. The occupation commenced. Freedom evaporated overnight. The vibrant colors of Dutch life were drained away, replaced by the gray uniformity of Nazi control. Radios were confiscated. Bicycles, the primary mode of transportation, were stolen. Men were rounded up for forced labor. The Jewish population, neighbors, and friends began to vanish into the night. But the Dutch spirit was not easily crushed. A resistance movement grew in the shadows, hiding pilots, forging documents, and whispering news of the outside world. Yet the true test of endurance, the moment that would scar the national soul forever, arrived 4 years later. It is a period etched in history as the Hunger Winter of 1944-45. By late 1944, the Allies were close. Hope was tangible. In an attempt to assist the approaching liberation forces, the Dutch government in exile ordered a national railway strike against German transport. The strike was a heroic act of defiance, but the retaliation was merciless. The Nazi occupiers, in a fit of calculated cruelty, cut off all food and fuel shipments to the Western Netherlands. They turned off the heat. They turned off the light. And they locked the pantry. Then nature turned against them, too. The winter that year was one of the coldest on record. Canals froze solid. Gas and electricity were cut. In the freezing tenements of Amsterdam and The Hague, people burned their furniture, their books, and even the wooden blocks between the tram rails just to stay warm. But the cold was nothing compared to the hunger. Food stocks ran out. Bread, butter, meat, they became distant memories. The daily ration plummeted to less than 400 calories per person. People were reduced to scavenging in trash bins. And when there was nothing left, when the gnawing pain in their stomachs became unbearable, they turned to the only thing they had in abundance, the tulip. It is a cruel and haunting irony. The flower that had brought the nation its golden age, the symbol of its wealth and culture, was now the last line of defense against starvation. Women would trek into the freezing fields, chipping away at the hard earth to dig up the tulip bulbs. They weren't food. They were survival. Back in the dark, unheated kitchens, they would peel the bulbs like onions. They had to be cautious. The center of the bulb is poisonous and had to be removed. They would grate them, mash them, and boil them into a watery, bitter soup or bake them into bread that felt like clay in the stomach. Eating them wasn't pleasant. They tasted metallic and bitter. They caused throat irritation and skin rashes, but they filled the void. For that dreadful winter, the beautiful tulip became the food of the desperate. Tragically, for many, even the tulips weren't sufficient. The Hunger Winter claimed the lives of approximately 18,000 to 22,000 Dutch citizens. Bodies lay in the streets because the living were too weak to bury them. The vibrant, proud nation was reduced to a skeleton, shivering in the dark, waiting for a savior. They needed a miracle. They needed an army that wouldn't just bring guns but would bring bread. And far away across the ocean, that army was preparing to move. But while the people starved, the heart of the Dutch nation, its royal family, was fighting a different kind of battle, a battle to protect the future of the monarchy itself in a place that no one could have foreseen, a hospital room in Ottawa, Canada. While the storm clouds of occupation darkened the skies over Europe, a very different story was unfolding across the Atlantic. To ensure the survival of the House of Orange, the Dutch royal family had made the difficult choice to split up. Queen Wilhelmina led the government in exile from London, but her heir, Princess Juliana, along with her 2 young daughters, was sent to the safety of Canada. They arrived in Ottawa, a city that must have felt like another world compared to the war-torn streets of Europe. Here, there were no air raid sirens, no blackout curtains, no jackboots marching on the pavement. For a few fleeting years, the future Queen of the Netherlands experienced a life of remarkable normalcy. She shopped at the local grocery store, queued like everyone else, and sent her children to a Canadian public school. The citizens of Ottawa didn't just host them, they embraced them. They respected their privacy and offered a warmth that the princess would never forget. But in 1943, this quiet refuge faced a constitutional dilemma that sounded like something out of a movie script. Princess Juliana was expecting. Under ordinary circumstances, a royal birth is a cause for national celebration. But these were not ordinary circumstances. The laws of succession were strict. For a child to remain in line for the Dutch throne, they needed to hold exclusive Dutch citizenship. But Canada operates under the law of jus soli, the law of the soil. Anyone born on Canadian territory automatically acquires Canadian citizenship. If the baby was born in Ottawa, the newborn prince or princess would technically hold dual nationality. This legal technicality could theoretically strip the child of their right to the throne, creating a disastrous gap in the royal lineage at a time when the Dutch people needed their monarchy as a symbol of hope more than ever. The princess was confined by geography. She couldn't return to the occupied Netherlands, and she couldn't jeopardize the succession by giving birth in Canada. So the Canadian government did something extraordinary. They didn't amend the law. They redefined the map. In a move unprecedented in history, the Governor-General of Canada issued a special proclamation. The 4 walls of the maternity ward at the Ottawa Civic Hospital were declared extraterritorial. For the duration of labor and delivery, that single room ceased to be Canadian soil. It became legally and symbolically a tiny sovereign enclave of the Netherlands in the heart of North America. Canadian sovereignty simply stepped aside to allow a new life to enter the world safely. On January 19, 1943, Princess Margaret Francisca was born. She was the first and remains the only royal baby ever born in North America. Her name, Margaret, was chosen deliberately. It refers to the marguerite or ox-eye daisy, a flower that served as a symbol of resistance in the Netherlands, worn by patriots to show allegiance to the royal house. The news traveled quickly. When word reached the occupied Netherlands via secret radio broadcasts, it sparked a wave of quiet jubilation. It was a sign that the lineage was secure, that the Nazis had not prevailed. Back in Ottawa, the celebration was public and exuberant. For the first time in history, the Canadian flag on the Peace Tower of Parliament was lowered, and the Dutch tricolour was raised in its place. The bells of the Peace Tower rang Dutch melodies, their sound drifting over the city that had become a cradle for a foreign heir in waiting. But as Princess Juliana held her newborn daughter in the safety of that international hospital room, her joy was tinged with a heavy burden. She knew that while her baby slept in a warm crib, thousands of Dutch infants were crying in the cold. She knew that while Canadians were rejoicing for her, they were also preparing to fight and die for her country. The debt of gratitude was mounting, and soon the soldiers of the nation that had sheltered the princess would be called upon to save her people. While the new princess rested safely in Ottawa, the sons of Canada were battling through the mud and blood of Europe to reach her people. By late 1944 and early 1945, the 1st Canadian Army was tasked with a mission that many considered impossible. They were to clear the northern flank of the Allied line, advancing through flooded lowlands and heavily fortified German positions to liberate the Netherlands. It was a brutal, grinding campaign. They battled not just the enemy, but the terrain itself: breached dikes, fields turned into swamps, and bitter, bone-chilling cold. But as the Canadian tanks advanced into the western Netherlands in the war's final days, they brought more than firepower. They brought life for the Dutch population. Emerging from the horrors of the hunger winter, the sight of a Canadian uniform wasn't merely a political change, it was a divine intervention. These soldiers witnessed a humanitarian catastrophe. They found a population reduced to shadows, men and women with hollow eyes and skeletal frames, children who had stopped growing because their only food had been tulip bulbs. The soldiers did what any compassionate human would do. They paused the fighting and began feeding. History records this as Operation Manna. In a surreal twist of warfare, Allied bombers, the same machines designed to flatten cities, were loaded with a different payload. They flew low over the starving cities of Rotterdam and The Hague, opening their bay doors. But instead of high explosives, they dropped sacks of flour, crates of dried eggs, chocolate, and tins of meat. Down below, the Dutch people looked up in fear, expecting death, only to see food descending from the sky. They rushed to the rooftops, frantically painting messages in white paint, large enough for the pilots to see, 3 simple words that would define a century of friendship: "Thank you, Canadians." On the ground, the scenes were even more visceral. Veterans recall the moment they entered the liberated towns. They were swarmed, not by an angry mob, but by a sea of orange. People climbed onto the tanks, weeping, laughing, kissing the dusty faces of the soldiers. Hardened infantrymen who had witnessed the worst of humanity for years broke down in tears as they distributed their own rations, chocolate bars, cigarettes, and dried biscuits to starving children who had never tasted sugar in their lives. For a brief shining moment, the horror of World War II was replaced by pure, unadulterated joy. But this freedom was purchased at a terrible price. We cannot recount the story of the tulips without recounting the story of the graves. More than 7,600 Canadians died liberating the Netherlands. They were young men from the prairies of Saskatchewan, the fishing villages of Nova Scotia, and the streets of Toronto. They came to a land they did not know to fight for people they had never met, and they never returned home. Today, in places like Holton and Grosbeek, there are thousands of white headstones standing in perfect rows. These are fragments of Canada in Dutch soil. And if you visit these cemeteries today, you will notice something profound: they are immaculate. For 80 years, local Dutch schoolchildren have tended these graves. Families adopt them, bringing flowers on Christmas and birthdays, ensuring that their Canadian soldier is never forgotten. This was the dual debt that Princess Juliana faced when she finally returned home in May 1945. She returned to a country that was free but shattered. She saw the starving faces being nourished again thanks to Canadian food. She saw the fresh graves of the men who had died to open the door for her return. She realized that the bond between her country and Canada was no longer merely about diplomatic protocol or royal hospitality. It was forged in blood and sealed with bread. It was a bond between a mother who was given refuge and a nation that was given life. And so, as she gazed over her liberated yet scarred kingdom, Juliana knew that a simple letter of thanks would not suffice. She needed a gesture that was alive, something that would return year after year, just like the memory of liberation. She thought of the flower that had kept her people alive in the darkness, and she decided to send it back as a symbol of light. The war ended in May 1945. The silence that fell over Europe was the silence of exhaustion. The Netherlands was free, but physically and economically shattered. Cities lay in ruins, infrastructure was destroyed, and the soil itself was scarred by saltwater and explosives. In such a landscape of devastation, where every resource was precious and reconstruction was the only priority, one might expect a nation to hoard its assets. But Princess Juliana did the opposite. In the autumn of 1945, barely months after the Germans surrendered, a massive shipment arrived at the docks of Ottawa. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't money. It was 100,000 tulip bulbs. This was a gesture of staggering generosity. Remember, just one winter prior, these bulbs were being consumed to stave off death. Now, they were being sent across the ocean, not as food, but as a symbol of resurrection. It was the royal family's way of declaring that the darkness had truly passed and that beauty was permitted to exist again. The Canadians planted them, and when spring arrived in 1946, the capital city erupted in a riot of color unlike anything it had ever seen. But Juliana understood that a one-time gift, no matter how large, would eventually fade. Memories are short, and history has a way of being forgotten as new generations rise. She wanted the bond between Canada and the Netherlands to be living, breathing, and perennial. So in 1946, she made a promise that would outlive her. She sent another shipment, 20,500 bulbs this time, with a specific request. She asked that a portion be planted right at the Ottawa Civic Hospital, so that the flowers would bloom every spring outside the very window of the room where her daughter was born. Along with this shipment came a pledge. The Dutch royal family would send 10,000 bulbs to Ottawa every year for as long as they lived. It was a contract of friendship signed not with ink, but with roots. The Dutch bulb growers, moved by their princess's gesture and their own gratitude for liberation, decided they would not be left out. The Dutch Growers Association matched the gift. And so the annual tradition was established, 10,000 from the palace, 10,000 from the people, 20,000 flowers arriving every autumn like clockwork. For the first few years, Ottawa simply enjoyed the view. But the flowers kept coming. They multiplied. The display grew more spectacular with each passing season. It took the eye of a visionary photographer named Mala Kh to recognize that this was more than gardening. It was a phenomenon. Kh, whose brother was the renowned portrait photographer Isef Kh, famously said that he drew limitless inspiration from the tulips. He lobbied the local board of trade, arguing that this unique diplomatic treasure should be celebrated. In 1953, his vision became reality. The first Canadian Tulip Festival was held. It started small, a local celebration of spring, but the story behind the flowers was too compelling to remain local. Over the decades, it grew into the largest tulip festival on the planet, rivaling even those in the Netherlands itself. It became a pilgrimage site. The royal connection remained the festival's beating heart. In 1967, during Canada's centennial year, Queen Juliana returned. She didn't come as a refugee this time, but as a monarch, standing on the soil that had sheltered her, surrounded by the blooms of her gratitude. Decades later, in 2002, the cycle came full circle. Princess Margaret, the baby born in the International Hospital room, returned to Ottawa to celebrate the festival's 50th anniversary. She walked among the flowers that were, in a poetic sense, her siblings, all born of the same wartime struggle. And the tradition continues to evolve, finding new ways to speak to the present. In 2020, to mark the 75th anniversary of liberation, the Netherlands didn't just send the usual amount. They launched the Liberation 75 campaign. Their goal was monumental: to plant 1.1 million tulips across Canada, one for every single Canadian who served during the Second World War. From a desperate meal in a freezing winter to a million blooms across a continent, the tulip had completed its transformation. It was no longer just a flower. It had become a living monument. But this brings us back to the question we began with: why continue? The war is ancient history to the TikTok generation. The veterans are almost all gone. Why do the Dutch still feel this intense need to send these flowers? And why do Canadians still flock to see them with such reverence? The answer lies not in the past, but in what these flowers signify for the future. Why does the Netherlands continue this practice? It has been nearly 80 years. The generation that endured the hunger winter is fading into history. The young soldiers who stormed the dikes are now great-grandfathers, or names etched on white stones. In a fast-paced world where alliances shift like sand and historical memory is often measured in news cycles, why does a modern European nation continue to send perishable bulbs across the Atlantic year after relentless year? The answer is simple yet profound. True gratitude is not a transaction. It is not a debt that can be paid off once with a receipt. It is a continuous act of remembrance. For the Dutch people, the arrival of spring is inseparable from the arrival of Canadians. You cannot separate the two. To stop sending the tulips would be to admit that memory has faded, that the sacrifice of those 7,600 Canadian boys has become less significant over time. And that is something the Netherlands refuses to do. These flowers have become a ritual of memory. Much like the poppy is worn in November to honor the fallen, the tulip blooms in May to celebrate the living. But there is a crucial distinction. Stone monuments stand still. They weather in age. Flowers are alive. They perish and they return. Every spring, when the green shoots pierce through the thawing Ottawa soil, it is a biological reenactment of the liberation. It is life returning after a long, harsh winter. It compels every new generation to ask the question, why are they here? And in answering that question, the story of the sacrifice is passed down to the young. This tradition has also developed into a unique form of floral diplomacy. In international relations, this is what specialists call soft power. But to those involved, it feels more like family. It sustains the bond between Canada and the Netherlands in a uniquely intimate way. It's why prime ministers and royals continue to visit one another, not merely as allies, but as kin. It's why, when you stroll through the streets of Ottawa today, you will see the Liberation 75 tulip, a brilliant orange solar flare of a flower, thriving in schoolyards and private gardens. It teaches the youth a profound lesson. When a Canadian child asks their teacher, why are there so many tulips, they aren't just told about botany. They are told about a princess who needed refuge. They are told about a starving child who needed bread, and they are told about a soldier who left the safety of his home to fight for the freedom of a stranger. It transforms the abstract notion of liberty into something you can see, touch, and smell. So, let us return to where we began, back to Commissioners Park by Dow's Lake. The sun is setting now, casting a golden glow over the endless rows of red, yellow, and orange. The crowds are thinning. Near the water's edge, an elderly man stands. He is wearing a Legion beret. He reaches out, his trembling hand brushing the velvety petal of a single orange tulip. He recalls the mud. He recalls the cold. He recalls the cheering crowds of 1945. A few feet away, a young family of tourists is speaking Dutch. They stop. They see the veteran. They don't know his name. He doesn't know theirs. But they witness the way he gazes at the flower, their national flower. The father nods to the veteran. The veteran nods back. No words are exchanged. No words are needed. The flower has already spoken everything. This is why the ships continue to cross the ocean. This is why the bulbs are still planted. Because some debts can never be fully repaid, but they can be remembered beautifully, vibrantly, and eternally. As long as the tulips bloom in Ottawa, the world will know that Canada saved the Netherlands, and the Netherlands will never, ever forget.